Part 1. The Old Man's Voice. My name is Edward Clark, though most people in this town just call me Mr. Clark. I am 84 years old, and I have lived long enough to watch the world change so fast it sometimes makes my head spin. There was a time when people leaned in when an old man spoke. They'd pull their chairs closer, set down their cups of tea, and listen as if each word mattered. Experience was a treasure back then, hard-earned, respected, passed on like heirlooms from one generation to the next. Now, I find myself talking to walls. Well, not walls exactly, my grandchildren. 3 of them. Bright faces, smooth skin, and eyes that never seemed to lift from the glowing rectangles in their hands. "Grandpa, you tell such long stories," little Sophie says sometimes, not looking up from her phone. She's 12, her hair always tied up in a messy ponytail, her fingers moving across the screen like a pianist's. I try to laugh it off, though the words cut deep. Long stories. They used to call them lessons. Now, they're just too long for short attention spans. I've lived through wars, through hunger, through times when we thought the sky itself might fall. I've lost friends on battlefields, built a family from nothing but calloused hands, and kept promises when it nearly broke me. And yet, when I speak of these things, the children only nod politely. Their thumbs keep scrolling. Their faces glow in blue light. Did I ever tell you about the winter of '53? I begin, one evening as we sit around the table. They nod, though I know they aren't listening. That was the year the river froze solid. People walked across it with buckets to fetch coal. I remember your great-grandmother baking bread with flour so scarce we had to line it with potato skins. I thought the world was ending, but she laughed in the face of hunger.
I pause. Silence. Not the silence of awe, but of indifference. Sophie's giggling at something on her screen. Then, my oldest grandson is half listening with headphones tucked into his ears. And me? I sit there, feeling like a ghost who hasn't yet realized he's already invisible. But let me tell you this, if you're listening, a man who has lived 84 years does not speak only for himself. He carries the voices of all the people who no longer can. The ones who fell, who gave everything, who whispered their last words into the wind, hoping someone, anyone, would remember. I try to carry them. I try to pass them down. Even if my grandchildren don't listen, maybe one day they'll remember. Maybe when life breaks their hearts for the first time, they'll hear my voice echo in the cracks. And so, every Sunday when they visit, I keep speaking. Not because they ask. Not because they want, but because silence would mean surrender. Part 2. Memories carved in stone. I wasn't always an old man in a chair no one listens to. Once, I was a boy running barefoot through Yorkshire fields, the air thick with the smell of hay and coal smoke. Life wasn't easy then. It never was, but it was full. I remember my father's hands, rough and blackened from the steelworks. He used to say, "Eddie, every scar on my palm is a lesson. Look close, and you'll see a whole book written here." I looked, and I did see it. Burns from hot iron, cuts from sharp steel, calluses from endless labor. He couldn't read many words on a page, but his hands held more knowledge than any library. When the war came, I was 17. Too young to understand what I was signing up for, too proud to admit I was terrified. We marched into the unknown, believing we were heroes before we even earned the right to the word. I lost friends out there. Good boys. Boys who had never kissed a girl or tasted ale on their lips. The mud swallowed their names. But I carried them back with me, carved deep into my bones.
Sometimes, when I try to tell my grandchildren about those days, I see the faintest flicker of interest, the part where bombs fell, or where the ground shook like thunder. They'd perk up, but only for a moment. Then a notification pings, and my war becomes smaller than a cat video. I once told Ben, I remember crawling through a trench, so hungry I chewed on a piece of leather just to keep myself from fainting. That night, I promised myself that if I ever had a home again, I'd never let my children go to bed hungry. He smiled at me kindly, then asked if the Wi-Fi password had changed. After the war, I came back with scars that never quite healed. But I also came back with determination. I built a house with my own 2 hands, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. I married Margaret, the only woman who could outstare me in an argument, and together we filled that house with laughter and chaos. She was fierce, my Margaret. She'd throw a rolling pin at me if I dared speak out of turn, but she also held my head in her lap on nights when the ghosts of the battlefield returned. She raised our children with the kind of love you could taste in every Sunday roast. She's gone now. Cancer took her a decade ago. Some nights, I still reach across the bed before I remember the cold truth of the empty pillow. When I tell the children about her, about how she could make a stew out of scraps, or how she danced with me once in the rain while neighbors laugh from their windows, they smile politely. But I see it. The way their eyes drift back to their screens. As if a woman who once carried their bloodline in her arms is less interesting than a stranger's dance on TikTok. Do you know what's cruelest about age? It's not the pain in your bones or the slowness of your step. It's realizing that the stories that built you, the ones you bled for, wept for, cherished, are fading into irrelevance before your very eyes. I tell them, you think your world is fast now? Ours moves slower, but every moment was earned. Every kindness had weight. Every mistake carried a lesson you couldn't undo with a backspace key. They nod, but they don't hear me. And yet I keep talking. Because these stories aren't just mine, they belong to them too. They are the roots beneath the soil they walk on. One evening, after I had shared yet another story about how I once carried my friend Miles on my back after he was wounded, Sophie looked up from her phone just long enough to say, "Grandpa, you're so dramatic." Dramatic. That word hung in the air like a slap. I wanted to tell her, drama is life when you're fighting to survive. Drama is the reason you're here at all, little girl, because men like me made it through. But I swallowed the words, because one day she'll face her own battle. And maybe then she'll remember the old man who refused to stop talking. Part 3. Voices Against Screens. It was a Sunday afternoon when they finally came. My daughter had dropped them off with a rushed kiss on my cheek and a mumbled, "Only for a few hours, Dad. I've got errands." Errands. That word always sounded like an excuse, but I let it pass. The children tumbled in, shoes squeaking against the old wooden floor, then immediately slouched onto the sofa, phone in hand, earbuds already buried in his ears. Sophie pulled out her tablet and began scrolling without a word. I stood there for a moment, cane in hand, watching them disappear into the glowing rectangles. My living room, once full of the sound of Margaret's laughter and the chaos of children running in circles, now buzzed with artificial noise I couldn't hear. I cleared my throat. "How about some tea and biscuits, eh?" I sat down with a sigh. "Do you know," I began, "when I was your age, there were no screens to hide behind. We had to make our own adventures." Then glanced up briefly, pulled out one earbud, and said, "Like what, Grandpa?" Hope sparked in me. I leaned forward. "We built kites out of old rags and sticks. Once my brother and I tied one to a bike and rode so fast the kite nearly dragged us into the river. We were covered in mud, but we laughed so hard I thought my ribs would break." Then smirked faintly, then shrugged. "Sounds messy." And just like that, the earbud went back in. Sophie didn't even pretend. Her fingers kept swiping, her face lit by the artificial glow. But I didn't stop. I told them about the war, not the blood or the fear, but the friendship. How men shared crusts of bread like they were feasts. how one letter from home could make you feel invincible for a week. I told them about building their mother's first bicycle, how I'd scraped my knuckles raw trying to tighten a bolt that refused to move, how her smile, when she first wrote it down the lane, was worth every drop of blood. Still, the only answer I got was silence. It was then I realized the truth. I wasn't competing with boredom. I was competing with an entire world in their palms. A world brighter, faster, louder than my voice could ever be. But I wasn't ready to give up. I leaned back and asked softly, "Do you want to know the greatest lesson I ever learned?" Sophie finally looked up. "What's that?" she asked, though her tone carried more politeness than curiosity. I held her gaze. "That people are the only treasure worth fighting for. Not money, not things, not fame. People. Because when the bombs fell, no one cared about coins in their pockets. They cared about the hand they could hold, the voice that whispered they weren't alone." For a moment, there was silence. A fragile pause where I thought maybe, just maybe, my words had landed. Then Sophie's tablet chimed. She looked down, typed a quick reply, and the moment was gone. I swallowed the ache in my chest. I wanted to shout, to grab their shoulders and beg them to listen while they still could. But I didn't. Instead, I said quietly, "One day, you'll want to know these things, and I won't be here to tell you." Neither of them answered. Later, when they left, the house fell silent again. I sat in Margaret's old chair, staring at the untouched biscuits, and wondered whether wisdom dies not when old men forget, but when young people stop caring to listen. And yet, even with that thought heavy in me, I knew tomorrow I would try again. Because hope is a stubborn thing, and love doesn't quit just because it isn't returned. Part 4. The Listener. The following week, the house was too quiet again. I moved slowly from room to room, dusting picture frames, straightening cushions, pretending there was still a rhythm to my days. My cane clicked softly on the wooden floors, a metronome counting down to nothing. When the afternoon sun slanted through the curtains, I sat by the window with a blanket on my knees. Across the street, neighbors hurried by, mothers tugging children, young men with earphones, old couples carrying groceries. Faces passed like shadows, none pausing, none looking up. I thought of Ben and Sophie, laughing at their screens, and my chest tightened. It wasn't anger I felt, but an ache, as if my stories were fading ink on a page no one would read. "Need a hand?" I called. My voice cracked like old timber, but it carried. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, hello. I'm fine, really. Just the chain slipped." I smiled faintly. Chains don't just slip. They ask for attention. "Bring it over." Hesitant, she wheeled the bike up my path. I crouched slowly, knees protesting, and guided her trembling hands. "Not like that. Loop it here, then hook it back over the cog." Yes, that's it. Within minutes, the chain sat snug again. The girl's eyes lit up. "Wow, you're a genius." I chuckled softly. "Not genius. Just practice. 1,000 small mistakes before one success. That's how life works." She sat on the step beside me as I caught my breath. For the first time in years, someone was looking at me not as furniture, not as an old man to be endured, but as if I mattered. "Were you a mechanic?" she asked. "No," I said. "I was a soldier, then a builder, then a father. Life gives you many jobs if you last long enough." Her brow furrowed. "What was the hardest?" I thought for a long moment. Not the war. Not the work. The hardest thing was staying kind when the world gave me reasons not to. She was silent, her eyes wide. She wasn't scrolling. She wasn't distracted. She was listening. And so I told her. I told her about the war, the friendships, the fear, the night skies torn apart by fire. I told her about Margaret, how she danced barefoot in the rain the day we got engaged. I told her about raising children on wages that barely stretched, how I once went hungry so my daughter could have a birthday cake with real sugar icing. The girl's face shifted with each story. Surprise, sadness, joy. She asked questions, real ones. What did it feel like? Were you scared? Did you regret anything? And with each answer, I felt lighter, as if pieces of me long buried were finally seeing the sun again. When she finally stood to leave, she touched my arm gently. "Thank you. Nobody ever talks like that anymore. I'll remember what you said." Her words struck deeper than she could know. Not because they were grand, but because they acknowledged something my own family could not, that I was still here, still human, still worth hearing. As she rode off, I sat back in my chair, the ache in my bones dulled by a new warmth. Perhaps wisdom doesn't need blood ties to survive. Perhaps it only needs one open ear. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without waking. And in the quiet of my dreams, Margaret's voice whispered, "See, you're not invisible yet." Part 5. The Echo of Memory. The days blurred like watercolors in the rain. Sometimes I would wake thinking it was 1962, that Margaret would be downstairs making porridge, humming in that off-key way of hers. Then I'd hear the silence pressing against the walls and remember that time had stolen her voice long ago. Ben and Sophie came once that month. They arrived with quick footsteps and apologies already forming in their mouths. "Sorry, Grandpa. Traffic was crazy, sorry. We couldn't stay long." I had baked scones, the way Margaret used to, dry at the edges but soft in the middle. They nibbled politely, phones buzzing on the table. I told them about fixing the girl's bicycle chain, how she listened as though my words were treasures. Sophie smiled faintly without looking up. "That's sweet, Grandpa." Her thumbs tapped out a message faster than my eyes could follow. Ben laughed at something on his screen, the glow painting his face blue. That evening, I wandered down to the park with my cane. Children played football, shouting names I didn't know. A boy kicked the ball too far, and it rolled to my feet. Slowly, I bent, picked it up, and passed it back. "Nice aim," I said with a smile. He grinned. "Thanks, mister." The game resumed. And though it was nothing, a ball returned, a smile exchanged, I felt a flicker of belonging. The girl with the bicycle returned 2 days later. Her name was Clara, I learned. She came not with a broken chain this time, but with a notebook. "Could I write down some of your stories?" she asked shyly. "I don't want them to vanish." My chest tightened. For a moment, words deserted me. Then I nodded. And so we began. Each afternoon, Clara came by. She sat cross-legged on the rug, pen poised, eyes wide. I told her of rationed books, of the smell of coal fires, of the day Margaret gave birth while I waited in a hallway biting my nails to the bone. I told her about mistakes too. The time I shouted at my son for dropping a hammer. The letter I never sent to a friend who died before I could apologize. She wrote it all. Not polished, not edited, just as it was, raw and trembling. People need to hear this, she whispered once. Not the world in textbooks, but the world inside you.it struck me then. Perhaps my own grandchildren didn't need my stories. Perhaps they were too close, too wrapped in their own beginning to value my ending. But someone else, some stranger with a notebook, could carry the torch. Wisdom, after all, isn't property. It's seed. You scatter it, and it grows where the ground is ready. Weeks turned into months. My health faltered. Some mornings the cough stole my breath. Some nights the pain in my chest felt like iron tightening. I knew the illness was winning. The doctors had been clear. There was no cure, only borrowed time. But when Clara knocked, I found strength. She asked, "What kept you going when everything seemed broken?" And I answered, "Hope, even the smallest kind." Hope is a stubborn weed. It grows in cracks where nothing else survives. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. One evening, she read aloud from her notebook, my own words, given back to me in her young voice. And I felt something I hadn't in years, immortality. Not the kind of statues or fame, but the kind that lives in another heartbeat, another breath. Margaret once told me, "We don't live forever, Eddie. But our stories can, if we plant them right." She was right. The last time Ben and Sophie visited, they still checked their phones, still laughed at messages. But I didn't mind anymore. I gave them scones, I smiled. I kissed their foreheads when they left. I no longer waited for them to listen, because I had found ears elsewhere. And I had found peace in the telling, not the response. One night, lying in bed with the moonlight spilling across the quilt, I closed my eyes and whispered, "I forgive you for not hearing me, my loves. One day you'll wish you had. But don't be sad, I was heard." And in the silence that followed, I could almost feel Margaret's hand in mine, warm and steady. Epilogue, the quiet legacy. I don't know how long I have left. Days, weeks, maybe a season. But it no longer frightens me, because Clara promised she would finish the book. She would keep my words alive. She would remind the future that old voices are not echoes, they are foundations. And perhaps one day Ben and Sophie will pick it up. Perhaps they will read my stories not on a glowing screen, but on a page they can touch. Perhaps they will understand too late. But that is all right. For now, I sit by the window, cane by my side, watching the world rush past. I am no longer invisible. My stories are out there, waiting for ears I will never see. And in that knowledge, I find a strange, fierce joy. Because the measure of a life is not who listens when you speak. It is that you dared to speak at all. Part 6. The Unseen Audience. It was Clara who organized it. One Saturday, she knocked with her usual shy smile, but behind her stood 3 people holding cameras and a microphone. "I hope you don't mind," she said, "but I told a local history group about you. They want to record some of your stories for their archive." For a moment I froze. My instinct was to say no, to keep the words between me and the notebook. But then I thought of Margaret, of her saying, "Plant them wide, Eddie. Don't be stingy with seeds." So I nodded. They set up in the sitting room. The curtains let in soft light. I sat in my chair, hands folded, cane leaning beside me like an old soldier. "Tell us about your proudest day," one of them asked. I didn't speak at once. Instead, I thought of Margaret in her apron, flour dusting her hair, laughing as the children painted Father's Day cards with too much glue. I thought of the bridge I helped build that still stands over the river. I thought of the night I held my first grandchild in my arms. And then I said, "My proudest day was any day I chose kindness when anger would have been easier." They wrote it down. They smiled. I felt the room listen, not just hear, but listen. Weeks later, Clara showed me the video they had made. My voice quivered, my hand shook on screen, but the words were clear. She had uploaded it to a small channel online. "Look," she said, placing her phone in my hands. The video had thousands of views. Comments bloomed beneath it like wildflowers. "Reminds me of my grandfather." "Thank you," cried listening to this. "I'll call my parents tonight." We forget how much wisdom we lose when we don't ask. I read until my eyes blurred. People I'd never meet had found me. People I'd never touch had carried my words into their own lives. And then, unexpectedly, Ben called. Not a rushed text, not a quick hello, but a call. His voice was soft, uncertain. "I saw your video, Grandpa," he said. "I didn't know people listened to you like that. I'm sorry we don't." Silence stretched, heavy but alive. My throat tightened. "It's all right," I whispered. You're listening now." And in that moment, the years of being overlooked seemed to melt. Not erased, but softened. A week later, Sophie came by with a notebook of her own. She sat awkwardly on the sofa, phone tucked away, and asked, "Could you tell me about Grandma? What she was really like?" I laughed, wiping at my eyes. "That will take more than one visit." "Good," she said, smiling. "Then I'll come back." The house feels lighter now. Not because I have more time. My body reminds me every morning that time is thinning, but because I know my words found their way. Not in the way I dreamed, not in the moment I wanted, but in their own season. And isn't that the truth of all stories? We don't choose when people hear us. We only choose whether to keep speaking until they do. So I keep talking. To Clara. To the camera. To my grandchildren at last. Because somewhere out there, someone is listening, even if it takes a lifetime for the sound to reach them. Part 7. The Last Lesson. Winter crept into the house early that year. The nights grew longer, the air colder, and my bones heavier. I moved slower, spoke softer, but still, every morning, I opened the curtains as if to tell the day, "I'm still here." The notebook by my chair was nearly full now. Pages lined with stories, advice, names of people long gone. I used to fear no one would read it, that it would gather dust on a shelf after I was gone. But now, with Clara's visits, with the children finally asking questions, with strangers online leaving messages like prayers, I realized something. Stories don't die when we do. They wait. They wait until someone is ready. One evening, Ben came over alone. He didn't bring his phone this time, or if he did, he never once looked at it. He sat across from me, fidgeting with his hands. "Grandpa," he said, "what do you think makes a good life?" It was the kind of question I'd been waiting decades to hear. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the boy, no, the man, sitting before me, and I saw his mother's eyes in him, my late wife's stubborn chin. Finally, I said, "A good life isn't measured in years, or money, or even success. It's measured in the people who breathe easier because you existed. Did you lighten someone's burden? Did you give someone hope? Did you forgive when you could have stayed angry? That's a good life." Ben nodded slowly, and for once, he didn't try to rush past the silence that followed. He let it settle, heavy and holy. Not long after, Sophie asked me if she could record my stories on her phone. For school, she said at first, but later I saw her listening back when she thought no one was watching. And little by little, the gap between my world and theirs began to shrink. It wasn't perfect. They still live fast, distracted, digital lives. But sometimes, in the middle of dinner, one of them would look up and say, "Grandpa, what did you do when?" And I would answer, and they would listen, really listen. I know my time is short. The doctors remind me, my body reminds me, but I am no longer afraid of being forgotten. Because I've learned this. The value of a voice is not in how loud it is, but in how far it travels. And sometimes it takes years, decades, for echoes to return. But when they do, they can move mountains. One night, before bed, I rang the little brass bell Margaret once bought at a market stall. For luck, she had said all those years ago. Its sound was thin, fragile, but it lingered in the air, weaving through the quiet house. I smiled and whispered into the empty room, "They hear me now, love. They finally hear me." And so my story ends not with silence, but with sound. Not with being ignored, but with being remembered. If you're watching this, if you've come this far, remember this. One day, someone will long for the words you dismissed today. Don't wait until it's too late to listen. Part 8, The Echo. The house is quiet tonight. Quieter than usual. The clock ticks in the hall like an old friend refusing to give up. Its steady rhythm reminding me that time, though relentless, can also be kind. I sit by the window, notebook closed on my lap, and I think about how far my words have traveled. Further than I ever dreamed. Sophie came earlier, smiling shyly as she showed me something on her phone. "Look, Grandpa," she said. "I made a channel. It's just your stories. People are listening. Hundreds of them. Some even thousands." She scrolled through the comments for me, reading them aloud. Strangers wrote things like, "I never met my grandfather. Listening to Edward feels like I finally did." Or, "I wish I had sat down with my dad before he passed. Thank you for reminding me to call my mom tonight." Tears welled in my eyes. For years, I feared my voice would die unheard, swallowed by the noise of a new world. But here it was, echoing in hearts I'd never touch in person. Later, When Sophie had gone, I turned the notebook over in my hands. I no longer worried it might gather dust. The words were already alive, carried in digital form, in memory, in the subtle changes of people's choices. A boy somewhere in the world called his mother because of me. A woman forgave her sister. A teenager put her phone down to listen to her grandfather's fishing story. What greater victory could an old man hope for? But still, I dream sometimes of the days when people sat around fires, when stories lived only in voices and memory, when listening was an act of respect, not a luxury. And yet, perhaps nothing has truly changed. We still long for connection, for meaning, for the reassurance that our lives matter. The only difference is the medium. Paper becomes screen, voice becomes recording. But the hunger? It remains the same. The night grows colder. I lean back, close my eyes, and hear again Margaret's laugh, my children's first cries, the songs we sang in harder times. I hear the echo of my own younger voice calling across decades. And I realize I was never truly ignored. I was simply waiting for the moment when the world was ready to listen. If you are here, watching this, hearing these words, know this. One day, the people you love will become memories. Treat them as voices worth hearing while they still breathe. Because when the phone goes silent, when the chair is empty, and when the bell no longer rings, it is too late. That is my last lesson. Not born of books, not pulled from headlines, but carved into me by 84 years of living, loving, losing, and surviving. The rest is up to you.